Hello, and welcome to the Soul Shaking Love podcast. I'm your host, Valerie Green from CoachValerieGreen.com. And this podcast is dedicated to bringing you the world's expert teachers on how to create a mind, body, and spirit connection, both with yourself and with your true love. And today, I'm really excited to interview sex therapist Susan Morgan-Taylor. Hi, Susan.
Hi, Valerie. Thank you for having me.
Yes. And I'm so excited. We were chatting before this, and, we're going to be talking about the 3 causes of mismatched libido in couples and how to fix it. And we were sort of chatting that, mismatched libido or desire discrepancy, it is one of the most common problems that couples experience, that like so many people wind up in sexless marriages for various reasons. I know, Susan, you can speak to that as well. When we get into, your personal experience as well as your experience working with couples, I was, looking into her history, and she definitely comes from personal experience here, as well as has a ton of experience. She's been working with the somatic healing for over 25 years, and she developed what's called the pleasure keys process, which is a powerful approach to reigniting sexual and emotional harmony in relationships. And after a personal awakening from a sexless marriage, Susan became passionate about helping others remove obstacles to pleasure, love, and orgasm, and really what couples can do to return to that connection and love and pleasure and playfulness with each other, which is really just, nobody gets into a relationship thinking that that's ever going to die. It's like people in the beginning of a relationship, in what's called the honeymoon phase, we assume it's going to last forever. That's what makes us commit, want to commit, I want this for the rest of my life. Of course, all the other factors are there too with compatibility, in our initial assessment. But then I agree, like a lot of what people say breaks couples up is that they have different desire, different libidos, and then they think they're incompatible. And I encounter that a lot. I know Susan encounters that a lot. So I wanted to bring her on the show so that we can really talk about how to get back to that place of true, mind, body, spirit intimacy, and, this dissolving into blissful union that, we can expect in a long-term relationship if we really deepen our connection over time.
Yes, that is just so hot. Thank you so much, Valerie. It's a beautiful introduction. And this topic, clinically, it's called desire discrepancy. That's the clinical term, but most often you hear it out there in the world as mismatched libido. Our desires don't match. And I've got, she's got higher desire, I've got low desire, or vice versa. The stereotypical is the opposite of that. If you're in a heterosexual relationship, we sort of stereotypically tend to think it's the women that have the low desire, but that's not necessarily always true. And there's reasons for that. So, it can easily be the other way around, or even in same-sex relationships. I have worked with same-sex couples as well with the desire mismatch. So it really isn't necessarily about gender. And really what I find, I know we're going to go into the 3 causes here in a minute, but it really comes down to understanding the roadmap and what's actually going on, what really leads to that. And it's really, at the end of the day, it's just a lack of education. We just don't understand sort of the building blocks of how do we get on the same page? How do we get on the same page? And strangely enough, I know you said, this blissful idea of becoming one. Yes, that's a beautiful, blissful experience. Strangely enough, how we get there is by really having more clarity around the difference, right? When you want that and I want this, can we get clear and how do we create clarity in the relational space so that we can work on the creation of that, of fulfilling that thing where nobody's just giving out of obligation. No one's just tolerating what's being done to them to not hurt somebody's feelings. So clarity is really an important piece. And that's a lot of what the pleasure keys process is about. It's really a pathway of creating clarity. It's 9 different principles that we learn to embody and embrace that actually create that clarity. It's a whole set of skills, really. And once the clarity is there, that's where pleasure lives. That's where joy lives. So yeah, I would say, that the creation of clarity is really at the core of how we resolve that issue. And we'll talk about what some of those things are. How do we
Yeah.
create that clarity and why that's important?
That's really wonderful. I mean, I actually just even love all the things you just said, meaning like, we strive and, the ultimate goal is that union. But if we assume that it should look a certain way, or we assume that the other person, it's like within that union, we can get enmeshed. And, I know Esther Perel, David Snarch talk about that a lot. I love their work too, like that we need to individuate. We need to really get clarity as to what it is that I desire, what it is that you desire, and not assume it's the same just because we want to merge,
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear more about what that clarity means for you.
Yeah. And I think, because I love the word you use, the enmeshment, I think that, for those listening who maybe aren't familiar with that term, and why does that matter? Because what can happen when we're sort of in a state of really what's at the core sometimes of why that can be a problem. Sometimes that can feel really blissful and wonderful. Like, I don't even want to pathologize and say that's necessarily a bad thing. In Western culture, we have a big emphasis on the individual. But if you go to other cultures, that's not such a main theme, right? So I kind of like to leave space in there for letting that also be okay. However, where that can become a problem is we can lose contact with our own desire. And when that happens, what tends to happen is we default to what the other person is wanting. If we don't know and we don't have a good sense of our own body sensations, what's really a genuine yes or no for us, what's really my desire versus when am I just going along with my partner's desire, we lose access to what's in it for me. Does my pleasure live right now in this moment? We can become very disconnected from that. So I would say one of the very first causes of mismatched libido is not being in touch with our own genuine desire. And we end up sort of defaulting to whatever the moment is presenting or whatever our partner wants, to the extent we just go along with it. And then we don't understand why maybe we feel resentful, or why maybe, I'm not so really interested in intimacy or sex anymore. Like, it's just gotten kind of, I could take it or leave it, or I'm just going to do it to keep my partner happy. There's not much in it for me. That's really at the core of why that happens, is we lose touch with our own genuine desires. And we may be saying yes to things that maybe don't feel so great for us, but because we don't have that clarity, we're just going along with it. And what can also happen is even the other person, the so labeled, let's say, higher desire person, if we're talking about high desire, low desire, sometimes they just assume also that their partner is loving it because they're going along with it. Or they think they're doing something for the other person that the other person doesn't even want. So there's really no clarity there.
Mm-hmm.
So when we don't understand, I'll pause there and let you respond to that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I love what you're saying, because I agree. I think that happens a lot, and that couples don't necessarily feel comfortable talking about it as the second thing, because usually, I know we were like really chatting about Alison Armstrong before this, it's like usually like men don't really know how to tell women, and women don't really know how to tell men that they want something different without it sounding critical, or without triggering each other, or sounding like you're not doing it right.
Yes.
And then it's sort of a buzzkill. And so it's like, if both people, even if they are turned on, even if it is a libido mismatch and one's more turned on than the other, like the one who's less turned on, that could be more turned on, sort of, even if they have the clarity, a lot of times in my experience, they don't know how to say it without killing the mood. And it's like, well, I'm a little bit turned on, so I should just go with what my partner wants so that I don't hurt his feelings. I mean, it could be the other way around too, with, I'm using him, but like I've seen it equally, or not necessarily equally, because most of my clients are women, but with the couples that I've worked with, sometimes it is the man not wanting to say that he wants something different with the woman, because, he doesn't want to kill her turn on and then like ruin the date. And so it's, I found that's another reason. It's like sometimes we have the clarity, but we don't know how to communicate it. Or sometimes we just don't even have the clarity. And so then we're just like, oh, well, this is what I should do. And, this is what they want. So we'll go along with it.
Yeah. And I think that would really be one of the another cause of the mismatched libido is the fear or just the not asking. Once you know what you want, the not asking for it, the not knowing how to ask for it. Because to express our desire is one of the most vulnerable things that we can do. Right? I mean, it's a very vulnerable place to say, I want this thing. Will you give me this thing? Will you do this thing to me? So we have to work on kind of weeding out what's really actually going on inside of that. There's a lot of programming that kicks in, especially when we start to get to sex and intimacy. Like all the baggage shows up. Like, whereas we might not be able to say, well, I want to go out for Chinese food tonight. Like, right? That's a desire. Low stakes, right? Not too big a deal. If our partner is not up for it, we find something else. But it's really the same when it comes to sex. However, we've brought all these other things piled onto that moment, and we don't want to hurt someone's feelings. Or what if what I want is too much for my partner? Or what if they don't also want it? And then I'll be forcing something on them. Okay, so there's a lot of languaging that we use around it, but there's also these somatic, meaning body-based responses that are happening in our body that can lead to us to not being able to really be clear and just directly ask for what we desire. So that second piece is to ask for what you want. And we can really, the best way to do that is to understand, there's another really important concept that I teach in my work around understanding who is this happening for, right? Who is this moment for? Who is the touch happening for? A big influence in my work is the work of Dr. Betty Martin. So if anyone's familiar with the Wheel of Consent, she's a big influence on my work, and an aspect of my pleasure keys process is based on some of her Wheel of Consent work. But that piece of understanding who is this moment happening for can be so important. And we don't always have that clarity either in an interaction. We don't always have to know either. Let me put it that way. This isn't about constantly having it be, this time it's for me and this time it's for you, but having the clarity when things are going south, sometimes to back up a minute. And were you going down on me, for example, because you wanted that, because you enjoyed it, or were you trying to do it because you thought I wanted it? So no, because that can be where so much mismatch happens, right? Where one person's assuming, or they're trying to do everything to make her happy. And in her head, she's thinking he's just doing it for him right now because it's what he wants. And at the end of that interaction, nobody's actually happy because he thought he was doing it for her. She just figured she was giving it for him. And so nobody got anything out of it because we didn't really have the clarity on who was that happening for. Mm-hmm. So we kind of have to have that clarity as well. And that can help make speaking up a lot easier too. Like when we kind of know, okay, if you're giving this for my pleasure, it's not really what I'm desiring right now. Could we try something different? And there doesn't have to be any kind of hurt feelings or a damaged ego. Part of that is having a framework, having an understanding and a shared language. That's part of how we get out of this high libido, low libido mismatch thing, is we learn how to have a framework to work from where we have a shared language so that you can both together understand what's happening, and it makes it less personal. The framework can then kind of hold what's going on, and then it's not about like, oh, I just rejected my partner by asking for something different. So there's a lot of inner work that has to happen around that as well.
Yeah. Although I love that, because I think that that's the biggest obstacle in my experience for really bringing up what we want. I mean, there's one that we haven't yet mentioned, which is just shame around my own desire. Like a lot of people Absolutely. Are raised with a lot of sexual shame, and it's not okay to want something different. It's not okay
exactly.
to have these desires that might not be traditional or acceptable. And also shame about our bodies. And, I want this, but I can't enjoy it because I'm critical of myself. So, I mean, obviously there's all of that going on too, that I want to mention,
yes.
Which I know you also teach about. But, so my first question, just based on what you shared so far, because I think that we've really covered a lot of very common obstacles, the lack of clarity about what we want, then the lack of the ability to ask for what we want for various reasons. And then this misunderstanding about, well, who are we doing this for? That can lead to both people not feeling satisfied. And I think that like those are amazingly common obstacles. And, I'm sure everybody can relate to those, either from the current relationship that they're in or from the past. I certainly can from the past. And so my first question is just, how do you guide people to find the clarity? I know that you do a lot of somatic work.
Yeah. So somatic, for those listening who don't know what that word means, because I run into that a lot, there's a lot of different like approaches of coaching and therapy that fall under that umbrella of somatic. So the form that I use is really about incorporating the body, the feelings, the sensations, really using our, not just going up in the head and analyzing something, a problem, coming up with solutions mentally, or working with concepts and principles. That's useful. But really where the rubber meets the road is the response is happening in the body. So when we have something come up where we have a desire, let's say, but we're afraid to act on it, or something comes up that I want, but I'm afraid to mention that to my partner or to ask for it, there's something happening in the body beforehand. Right? It's not necessarily a mental block. There's probably some kind of fear, usually, almost always it's based on some kind of fear of rejection, fear that I'll be too much, shame, which even is sort of a fear that I'm bad or I'm wrong. So it's all kind of a feeling of fear, and there's different flavors of that fear. That's happening in the body first. And so if we just try to push past that and pretend it's not there and just push into doing of the thing, or I'm just going to go for it, ask for it anyway, and just push myself over, push myself over the hump there. That doesn't really give us a lot of opportunity to have self-discovery and really, really, really to sink in and learn about ourselves and find that edge of where our pleasure is living right here and right now, and then to meet and greet the thing that's actually in the way. So if it's shame, then the meeting and greeting of that looks like, oh, I give myself a moment to breathe into that and give some space to that feeling in my body. And I don't have to completely shut the whole thing down just because the shame is there. Can I say yes to that feeling? Can I invite that feeling in to become a part of this moment where I'm no longer unconsciously being, my actions aren't dictated by the shame, meaning I'm not completely going into freeze mode, fight or flight, or flight. I think those are common sort of trauma responses. But I start to breathe into that and make space for the shame and let my body begin to digest the feelings connected to it. And sometimes there might be memories connected to that feeling. And from there, then some space can open for us to have the opportunity to have a new relationship with that shame, for example. And possibly it can feel safe enough to allow an experience in. Maybe we can speak what we want. Maybe we can have the experience of receiving what we want. That's just an obstacle to pleasure. The shame, fear, resentment, numbness. These things are just the things that kind of get in the way of our ability to allow ourselves to receive. The perception of being selfish. And we have a lot of like psychological things that can get in the way. Those are just obstacles to our pleasure. So we learn how to work with them in real time, not by trying to get rid of them, but by actually inviting them into the moment and using our body to breathe into them and to have a new relationship with it. It no longer becomes the underlying script that's running the show.
Yeah, I love that. I'm familiar with so many teachings about that. I know Brene Brown is the most famous one that, shame lives in hiding. Yes. And when you really bring it out into the open, talking about it with a safe person like yourself and feeling it in the body, that's yes. when, and breathing into it and like actually giving it space and saying, okay, welcome. Where do you come from? Where did I learn that it's shameful? What's the truth about that? And just like really kind of like, oh, actually, I can be with this. It's not so scary. Maybe I don't have to be ashamed about being ashamed. Maybe I can
right.
accept this feeling. And, maybe I could even say it's really hard. I feel very vulnerable asking for this. I'm ashamed of asking for this, but I'm going to ask for it anyway, and you incorporate it in, right?
Absolutely. Yes. And I love that part about being ashamed of feeling the shame, because that's what'll happen a lot of times, especially when we start to really involve the body and the emotional pieces, is that tendency to try to talk ourselves out of the feeling. Oh, I shouldn't be feeling this way because this is intimacy and it's supposed to be pleasurable. So I'm going to try to not feel the thing that's actually coming up for me in this moment, for example. Or, I don't want to feel this way. So I'm going to pretend that I don't and act as if I don't. But every time we're doing that, we're shutting down our capacity for that direct experience of sensation. So if there's a lot of emotional shutdown that's happening, a lot of talking ourselves out of feelings because we don't want to feel the thing, we're moving ourselves away from pleasure and away from our orgasmic capacity. Orgasm really ultimately is the ability to receive and respond, to notice and respond to sensation. Ultimately, really,
Right.
that's really all it is. That's what orgasm is. And
Right.
if we're
And
constantly saying, don't feel that, don't feel that, don't feel that, eventually we lose access to the body sensitivity as well, which then we tend to default to becoming overly dependent on the indirect route of pleasure, which is through the visual cortex, through seeing someone in pleasure, like watching pornography or seeing somebody else, like our partner, have a good time, and then we can have a good time. We lose that connection to that direct route of pleasure, which is really critical if we are looking at how do you resolve a mismatch desire. We have to have access to that direct pathway in the body, and direct meaning directly from the nerve endings in the skin up to the brain, and doing some of that deeper emotional work where we're including sensations in the body, including feelings and emotions in the body, not just in the head. That really is a pathway in
yeah, I
to
love
that, bringing
that.
the clarity.
I love what you're saying. I actually want to merge it with, I think, this concept is normally talked about in shadow work, but if we look at sex and desire, a lot of what turns people on is kind of being naughty. Like doing things that
Taboo.
we're not supposed to do. And I feel like a lot of people don't make that connection between emotions that we don't want to feel. We still are like, oh, I don't want to feel shame, or I don't want to feel anger, I don't want to feel resentment, or I don't want to feel guilt when
Right.
I'm thinking about having a date with my partner. But if we can take it away from projecting that onto the other person, I'm ashamed about my own desire, or I'm ashamed about something about them, or I'm hurt by something they did, or I'm angry at something they did. If we can remove the language at them and take a look at, this is the sensation I'm feeling in my body. Emotions are sensations plus thoughts. And like really look at the thought. Is that thought true? But really bring that sensation into the body. Like, I'm angry and I'm not supposed to feel angry. How can I play with this? That's naughty. It's
Oh,
naughty to be like, I'm angry and I actually want to spank you, because I don't like that you did that, but can we bring playfulness to it? And
yeah.
like, I don't think it's right to want this. I feel ashamed of wanting this. And how can I open up my heart and my breath to that? And like,
Right.
how can I imagine doing that in a way that would also be fun for the other person? That's naughty to do. I shouldn't be doing that. Right. And I imagine that like, then that actually, if you give permission for all of that, then, as I was saying in the beginning, I actually used to be a Tantra teacher, although that's not what I'm specializing in anymore. But Tantra is actually, the roots of it are a spiritual practice of being present in high sensation of discomfort and high, like they in ancient rituals they would do transgressive rituals and shadow work of like really merging with people that you don't necessarily like, to see what your shadow is and to be really comfortable with discomfort. And I'm not saying that like, that's what we should be doing in modern and, in Western neo-tantra. A lot of times it's just like how to last longer and
Right.
have full body orgasms, which I'm not knocking that either. It's all fun. But if we bring a little bit of that in here, it's like, how can we actually bring up the things you're scared to admit you want, and like breathe into that and make space for that, right? That's what I hear you saying.
Well, absolutely. And just to take it, like on maybe a level that's even simpler, to be able, our sexual life force energy, every single one of our emotions, whether it's shame, fear, anger, or love, joy, passion, all of those hold an aspect of our life force energy. And so what you're speaking to with the ancient Tantra, not necessarily the neo-Tantra, but really the roots of Tantra, it's really about, we tend to go into the duality, right? But duality can be used to experience union. It's actually the pathway into oneness and wholeness and union. So one of the ways we can work with that is by not having aversion or attachment to any one state of being. And what we tend to do is our human condition is we attach to the nice things that feel good, and we try to get away from the things that don't feel good, such as shame. We'll just use shame since we're kind of on that thread. Shame doesn't feel good in the body. It wants to hide. It doesn't want to be seen. It's a really, really challenging thing to feel in the body. So we tend to try to hide from it or get away from it or feel ashamed for feeling the shame. And this whole compound thing, we create a whole thing around it, right? But really, one of the ways that we can work with that is by breathing, by slowing down, and by just coming into, I use a term called embrace, where we lean towards the discomfort. We lean towards the feeling that we're not wanting to feel and say yes to it. And even, and this might sound kind of crazy, but we even can sometimes say, give me more of that. Turn the volume up. Let me feel more of this. And the crazy thing that happens is when we do that, it allows space for expansion. And oftentimes, because we're no longer resisting the thing, it now has opportunity to transmute or transform or often shift into something different. So we're not just necessarily stuck there, but now because we're not fighting it anymore, it oftentimes can turn into something different. We don't know what that's going to be, but what I will say is I know that we can reach orgasmic experiences from feeling all the way through anger, for example, or fear, like which we consider negative emotions, and we try to avoid them. But that also can be a pathway actually into orgasm, is by leaning into that feeling, and we do it through the body, actually through allowing the body just to digest the energy of that emotion. That's the best way that I can describe it. It is part of our life force. So if we're trying to siphon off anger or shame or fear and not feel it, we're actually siphoning ourselves off from our capacity to experience pleasure and orgasm. So it's really about riding the waves and not about trying to recreate a nice feeling or only cling to the nice feelings. If we can say yes to all of it, that's really where the heights and depths of bliss and pleasure live.
Yeah, I mean, I love what you're saying. I think perhaps people could use like a story or an example, because it is, I think it's hard for a lot of people to imagine, like, what if I feel shame or anger, like turn the volume up on that and I'd feel more turned on. Like, what does it even look like?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I have some good ones. One of them happened during a sexual experience. And another one actually was related to my whole sexual awakening that happened really before I became, it's what led me to become a sex therapist. So maybe I'll share that one. And I was not in a relationship at the time. But one of the things I decided to do was to really make a date with myself once a week to explore my sexuality. I really was craving a different experience in sex. I knew there was more possible. I knew deeper states of connection and these thing called full body orgasms that I had heard about and read about, but I had no, I just thought that's for other people, not for me, or I can't do that. And I really decided, clearly, if it can happen to other people's bodies, then it's just something I could learn for myself. And I don't have to rely on a partner to give me that experience. Up to this point, I had always made my partner responsible for my pleasure and really thought that, my last partner was going to really just deliver me this great full body orgasmic experience. He did not deliver on that promise, and that relationship kind of ended pretty quick. This was shortly after my divorce, but it left me really realizing, like, wow, I've always made the man responsible for my enjoyment. And I've never really taken the time to really learn, like, what do I want? What do I like? How does my sexual energy work? So I started a self-pleasure practice that once a week, I set a couple of hours of time aside, got naked, laid on the bed, lit candles, put on music, and I connected with my body. Sexually and intimately, genitally, and emotionally. And something really, really, really interesting happened. When I very first started out, I noticed I didn't have a lot of sensation in my clitoris, like in my genitals, which was weird. I never had a problem with orgasm. Reaching climax wasn't hard for me. Like I know it is for a lot of women. That was never a problem for me. So it was very curious to me that when I actually slowed down and got really present, that I didn't have a lot of sensation. I had a lot of numbness. And I got really frustrated about not having sensation down there. I was like, what's going on? And why do I feel numb right here? And I want to feel something. So the natural tendency when that happens is to add more excitement or more pressure or more intensity, right? Well, if I'm not feeling anything, I'm just going to add more and try to make myself feel.
Yeah, or like
But I was like,
fantasize or whatever. But I
or
imagine that you
fantasize, right?
wanted
Go
to
up into
keep
your
it.
head space so that you can get the turn on going. But I was determined to do something different. One of the things I was working on was how to sensitize my body. So to get out of the habit of fantasy, because I always rely on fantasy in order to reach climax, but I really wanted to find this other pathway in. So I was resisting using not resisting, but I was like, oh, no, that's not going to be an option for now. So every time my mind would go there, I'd be like, nope, not right now. I'm just going to put that over here on this shelf. I can pick it up later. And I'm just going to stay with my body. I'm just going to stay with that point of contact between my hand and my genitals in this case. And as I did that and I relaxed, I got present. And I just said, okay, I'm going to just let this numbness be here. I'm going to even let this frustration that's coming up, I'm going to just feel it. I'm going to say yes to it. Instead of trying to get rid of it or change my emotional state, I leaned into it. I leaned towards it. And what ended up happening was I had a massive breakthrough of emotional release. I had all this grief and sadness that just started pouring out. I started crying and sobbing and all. It's odd. I could feel a movement happen. I don't know if it was energy or what, but it came from my genitals and up and out my heart. And I was just crying and like releasing. And then I was having memories from like years ago when my dad passed away. And then I went all the way back to like when I was a little, like all these memories just started flowing. And I just kept saying yes. And I was like, I wanted something different so badly that I just said, okay, bring me more and take me deeper. I want to go all the way through to the other side on this because I just had this intuitive sense that something more was possible and that I just didn't want to resist or unconsciously hold all this stuff that I didn't even know that I was holding. And then a crazy thing happened. After I had that experience in future self-pleasure sessions in the few weeks following that experience, I started to have a lot more sensitivity, not just in my genitals, but actually in my whole body. And during one of my self-pleasure sessions, just a few weeks after that, I had a full body orgasmic experience. That was literally the catalyst for me going, oh my gosh, like other women need to know that this is possible. I'd found the pathway within my own body. Nobody gives it to us. It doesn't come from someone outside of us. It's a natural state. It's a response state within our own body when we clear all the debris out of the way. And we do that by the thing in the way is the way. And that's why we turn up the volume on some of those uncomfortable emotions and we learn how to embrace and lean into it because eventually there is another side and everything looks different. And pleasure is actually tied up in some of those quote unquote negative emotions. So that's why, that's why when we resist something, we're creating more tension. Tension is the biggest killer of pleasure and biggest killer of libido, biggest killer of orgasm. So if anything we're resisting is going to get in the way. So instead of resisting the negative, can we say yes to it? Instead of trying to get away from it or be in aversion to it, can we lean towards it and let it be there and breathe into the body and notice what else is available to us as we do that? Because numbness will shift very, very quickly if we just get present with it and let it be there and not try to change it or make it wrong. Numbness usually just needs slowing down and it needs just more presence and usually a little more breath just to be with and to get curious about it. And 10 times out of 10, something else is going to eventually that numbness is going to thaw and the next piece will come through, whatever that is for you. So that's why we do that. What sounds crazy, like why would I want more of that? We do that because the more takes the resistance away.
Right, exactly. I love what you're saying. I mean, I'm just going to repeat a lot of it because I think you mentioned a lot of nuggets there. That like, first of all, I want to just validate that, if you want to create a specific result, like I don't want the numbness, I want pleasure as the result, then you block what's actually there, and
yeah, because we can't tell pleasure where to go. And that's a lot of times, right? Oh, I don't feel anything, but I want to feel. So I'm trying to make myself feel, but you're actually putting more roadblocks in the way of feeling if you're doing that.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it is like such a confusing phenomenon for a lot of people, I think, because in the coaching world, we say that we can influence how we feel because feelings are caused by thoughts and, needs getting met or not met. But with sex, I think what's interesting is that, of course, emotions are caused by thoughts and needs getting met or not met. But with sex, I feel like it has so much to do with the body, which is like our unconscious. And it's not about making ourselves feel something because then it's just kind of superficial. But I think what you said is this beautiful example that if you really say yes to what's there, like I love what you said, that what's in the way is the way. That if you resist, then you're creating tension, and tension is the antithesis of pleasure. And so it might seem counterintuitive to allow in more of what we feel is negative, but, I'm reminded of sort of like Buddhist or mystical philosophy here, where it's like everything is impermanent. Everything's always changing. Yes, and so if we embrace what we perceive as negative, like sadness or shame or anger or guilt or whatever. And I love the example that you give that, like, memories might come up or whatever it is that we're feeling might get more intense. But if we allow it and we're present with it, in kind of a meditative way, or using mindfulness, is kind of how I'm hearing it, just like being present with what is and really allowing this sensation to increase. You didn't necessarily feel more pleasure on that day. You felt more aliveness is kind of like what
That's a great way to put it. Yeah. I like the word aliveness because it was numbness eventually into just a lot of feeling in my body, which maybe you wouldn't label that as positive, but I'll tell you, having a massive emotional release of years of stuff that I didn't even know my body was holding on to, I felt so cleansed after that. And the lovely side effect was more sensitivity, which is really the pathway into having more of these blissful orgasmic experiences that don't require that we're dependent necessarily on someone else bringing that to us. Right? I mean, there's certainly ways in partnered situations where we can work with that, but it's not someone else's responsibility to give pleasure to me. It's not even possible to do that. Pleasure is a self state that happens it's a response within your own body. So if you are experiencing pleasure with another person because it's something, a certain way they're touching you, that's great. But a lot of that is because your capacity to respond and to receive that sensation, we'll just call it sensation, because you're tuned into that. And so that's why we have that ability to feel those things, but we tend to put it on the other person. Like, it's what he did to me that made me feel that way.
Right.
It was your body responding to a certain type of touch. It's not that the other person's completely irrelevant, but we can work on our capacity for increasing libido, enhancing orgasm, deepening connection by working on our capacity to receive and respond to sensation.
Yes. And then when, and I love what you said, that it's such a paradox with couples, like that he can't make me feel something. And at the same time, there is this devotional quality to romance. And so obviously, like, being with him, there's an attraction. So I'm more turned on when I'm around him, and there's things that he could do that'll increase my turn on, but it still comes from within me. Like, it's such a beautiful paradox,
Yeah, and I think one of the things to look at in terms of devotion, we can also add or reframe devotion as, what is it that you are devoted to? And because that makes a difference. I know how I work with it is the devotion to stay open as love, to love. The practice of love is really how I look at it. It's the practice of allowing myself to deeply feel what I'm actually feeling in my body in the moment, to embrace that and meet and greet it fully and allow it to be in the moment and to express that feeling without shutting it down or shutting my heart down. And it doesn't mean that my heart doesn't shut down. It doesn't mean that I don't get resentful. And it doesn't mean that I'm not in a bad mood sometimes, or angry or withholding. But what it means is that my commitment is to the open-heartedness, the softness in my body, the allowing myself to be present with what I'm feeling, and to do my best to not default to the habits of closure or hiding, which don't lead to connection or intimacy with myself or with my partner. And so, that's a beautiful gift that I can give to both myself and my partner, is my devotion to that,
Mm-hmm.
versus a devotion to something that is, external and not so much within my control to, show up in a certain way. Not that it's bad to have that either, but to be devoted to the practice of love is really, it's a very core and important aspect, I believe, of connection and relationship.
Yes, absolutely. That we can love the person in front of us, of course, but that has to be that we're devoted to being loving and having an open heart. And I think that's a really good segue into the communication piece, because I know that that's one of the reasons of Mismatched Libido that we mentioned in the beginning, is that we don't know how to ask for what we want. And if we think of asking for what we want, we get tripped up about that. And so then maybe we don't say it, and then we're not as turned on because we don't feel that we can say it. And so I imagine that the way to get past that has to do with speaking with an open heart and being devoted to being loving, even when we're communicating, something
Yeah.
like
And again,
maybe the other
yeah.
person is not wanting to hear, or like we're scared that they don't.
Yeah, I mean, I love to share, like, so part of the pleasure keys, this one's real easy to share on a podcast, and I love to share it because it's easy to remember and it speaks very much to what you're speaking to right now. It's called the 3 N's, and it's the second triad. The pleasure keys are broken into 3 triads of 3 principles each. The second triad, it's the 3 N's. So noticing, what am I sensing? What am I wanting, or what am I needing? Or what am I noticing? What am I noticing right now? If it can be that simple, that's really like this place that we return to again and again when we're feeling stuck and we don't know kind of which direction to go. Can you pause, relax, focus on the body, get back into sensation? Because sensation is the quickest bridge to the present moment. Those are part of the first triad of the pleasure keys. But we come into noticing, which is that fourth key, is just, can I notice this moment? What's happening? Sensations. What are my emotions doing? Is there something I need right now? Can I notice something that I need so that I could feel safer to ask what I want? Or is there something I would need so that I might be more in the mood to meet my partner's desire for intimacy? Can I identify what I need? And that can be a very, very deep level to work at. I need this. It might be something that I could give to myself. Maybe I just need to breathe deeply. Maybe I need to make this awkward moment be okay and not go up in my head and start thinking about it. Maybe I need to ask my partner if he'd be willing to give me something. So identifying what that need is, and then advocating for that need to be met, either meeting it yourself or asking your partner to give it to you. And that's where then we use the voice, right? That's the naming of it. Well, we can do it internally too. I just named what I need, and I need to take a deep breath. So I take a deep breath. So I give it to myself, but I've named it, right? Or if it's something I'm asking for of my partner, I name it. What I really need right now is just to hear, I just need to hear the words, I love you. Maybe that's all I need. Or I just need to hear that you got me. You got this moment. You've got this. And if they're willing to give that, that already has opened up more spaciousness. And now I can continue, you can continue to just work at that level, noticing and naming, noticing and naming. What else might I need so that I could open a little bit more? Oh, look, my body just relaxed more. Okay, now what I would need is to slow down. Can we just slow down a little bit? Would you just massage my back for a moment? Like, so we start to work at that level and we follow where the pleasure already is living. And from there, it can expand and open. And then we might be able to be ready for something more sexual, for example. And that comes to the third N, which is negotiating. How do we negotiate to either get the need met or have the desire fulfilled? And that's the third triad of the pleasure keys, which is much more intricate and it's not easy to go into on a podcast. But a lot of times what I see couples do is they're going straight into the negotiating of trying to get the thing. Right? Like he wants this thing and she's like not even there yet. And then it's a train wreck, right?
Right.
If we were to slow down, and let's just say in this example, she was given some time to notice what she would need in order to be maybe a couple inches closer to being in that kind of a state, right? So, okay, I need to take a hot bath. I just need to have the room warmer. I need to know that like the kids are asleep all the way, right? There's whatever the need is. And in that regard, the lower libido partner in that dynamic, she becomes responsible, or at least a co-creator in helping herself get to where she would need to be so that she might be more available for sexual intimacy, because there's a lot of pressure a lot of times put on the higher libido partner, right? They've got to be the initiator. They've got to be the one to do all the stuff for her. And it doesn't have to be that way. And it shouldn't be that way. She needs to take some responsibility also for her own libido style or arousal style. I've got a great resource on that too at the end. I'll offer it to your listeners if people want to figure out what is your arousal type. But if she can take some responsibility for that, that can be a game changer, and it takes some pressure off of the relational system too, and the high libido partner to have to figure it out and do all the stuff to try to get her in the mood. She can be responsible for helping get herself in the mood a little bit, but it's done by identifying what the need is and then advocating to create that. So it's a co-creative process, and that negotiation aspect, it's where a lot of couples go into what I call like the train wreck moments. They try to go there too fast when they haven't backed it up to the noticing and naming. So if a train wreck is happening, if that's anyone listening, like that keeps happening to the point where you're like avoiding being intimate because it's going to be awkward or weird, it's going to go south, slow it down and go back to that earlier point of, can I just notice what's happening in my body right now? Oh, I noticed I was moving too quickly. I noticed I was giving into your desire. I noticed that I need a little more time. So from there, we can move closer to connection and then that clarity that we were talking about earlier and getting back on the same page.
Yes, that makes so much sense. And I completely agree. A lot of times we just go right. I mean, I see it also in the emotional arena where we go right to asking for what we want rather than slowing down and saying, here's how I'm feeling and here's what I'm needing. What are you feeling and needing? How can we have both of our needs met, which is much more harmonious than just being like, I need you to do this, right? So it's the same thing with what you just said, that we can notice and name first, like what's really happening inside of us and what are our desires, to even be in the mood, and can we get ourselves a little bit closer, and kind of ease into it.
I want to point out too, in response to that the person, often we also default into an immediate yes. Okay, sure, I'll just do the thing. And then the thing is happening, and that person doing the thing has never slowed down to notice and name, are they actually really a yes to that thing? We move so quickly into the default, yes, I'll just do it because my partner wants it, or I'm obligated, or I have to, or I can't say no, or whatever. So that noticing and naming it goes both ways with the desire as well as with the person who is, being asked to fulfill that desire. Slow down, notice and name what's happening in your body and make sure that you're really a full-throated, willing yes to that.
Yes.
Or not, and that's okay too. And then there's a whole other way to work with that. So
right, then they get to say what they're noticing, and like really, like if you slow down enough, then there's always a way to harmonize. But it's like I think we're just living in a culture where we want to speed things up, and things are already sped up, and it's hard to slow them down. So I know that that's part of what your work is about. And I know that it's challenging to talk about all the keys in the podcast, but I know that your free gift is a little introduction to the pleasure keys. So perhaps if you want to kind of broad stroke them so that people have something to look forward to if they want to get into your work, you can talk about like what are the pleasure keys and what are the main principles about, because I know you mentioned like how to slow down and get past your resistance and identify what you want, get the clarity and communicate it, and use that to see what might be missing for the person who has lower libido and how to take the pressure off the person who has higher libido. And I just think that like you've already shared so much and you've alluded to all the pleasure keys. So I think it'd be great to just kind of mention them.
Well, what I'll say about the pleasure keys, they're really just they're a roadmap. It's a framework. It's a way to have a common understanding and a shared language around how we navigate our own bodies as well as the relational space when there's differences in desire, which there always is going to be in life, in anything, in any relationship. We're never going to always want the same things at the same time. So it's exceptionally useful in more areas than just the intimacy. But I have 2 free resources, because the other one I want to share with you too, it's a new one that I created. But the one you're referring to is the Pleasure Keys ebook, and that's at pleasurekeys.com. It goes into just those first 3 keys, which are really that fundamental, the triad of presence. When we learn how to slow down and shift our awareness into the body, we have to have that somatic. We talked about that. It just means body based. We slow down, we learn how to relax. Relaxation is where pleasure lives. And coming into physical sensation is a way that we get out of the head. It actually brings us into directly to the present moment without having to eradicate negative thoughts, or, we don't have to really do anything other than shift awareness. And so that's really a muscle that we learn to exercise in somatic work. And we have to be able to do that before we can get into that skill of noticing. If we're not present in the body and relaxed, we're not going to be able to get good at that skill of noticing. And so we talked about that second triad, the notice, name, negotiate. The third triad is the triad of negotiation. There's a lot of nuances to that, but essentially what that part of the framework is how do we create the clarity in the relational space when the desires are completely different, perhaps? How do we really create a situation where, let's say, touch can happen, but where nobody has to give out of obligation and no one's just tolerating what's happening? So there's a lot that happens in that particular dynamic that's very nuanced. But ultimately, that's really what it's about. It's about creating that clarity so that we can navigate that relational space between differences in desire. So that's pleasurekeys.com. And then I do have another resource that I thought of when we were talking about the what you can do and kind of taking responsibility. I would love to share if that's okay with you.
Oh yeah, I'm happy to put both links below.
Okay.
If you don't mind, I'm sure my watchers and my listeners would love it.
This one's really great, especially for the mismatched libido conversation. It's called the Sexual Speedometer Test, and you can get it at sexualspeedometertest.com. And it is really helping you figure out your arousal style. It's based on what's called the dual control model of sexual arousal, which, if anyone out there, if you're familiar, Valerie, with Emily Nagoski's work in her book, Come As You Are, she talks of the dual control model of sexual arousal. So essentially, we have a sexual nervous system, and we have a brakes, an inhibitor system, and an accelerator system, or an excitation system, just like we do in our parasympathetic versus sympathetic nervous systems. Same kind of thing when it comes to sexual arousal. And so it's a test that helps you determine where you fall on that scale. So if you have really high brakes, how do you get the brakes off? Or if you have a really slow accelerator. So sometimes we just need to have that clarity on what's the actual issue, so then you can constructively work with it. And what I do is I break it down into very easy to understand language, so you don't have to read. Emily Nagoski's book is awesome, but not everybody has time to read a book, and I find that book can be a little bit technical, and there's a lot of clinical. It's a very technical book, even myself as a therapist. Wonderful read if you're up for it. But so I take it and I break that test down into some very simple, easy to understand language. You don't have to really know any industry jargon or any clinical terminology to understand it. You take the test. It takes maybe 5 minutes, and I give you some tips for what to do depending on kind of where you fall in that range. So it's a really lovely resource. Whether you are in a relationship or not, it's really nice to kind of know what your arousal style is. And that's helpful if you have a partner. You both take it, and then you learn how to work with whatever's going on in the relationship, to the extent it doesn't have to be a liability. It can actually become something you work with instead of feeling like it's working against you.
Totally. Yeah. Because I agree that a lot of people that perceive mismatched libidos, they just need something different to get turned on. And,
right.
There's like all these different erotic styles, and there's so many teachers on that. And, I love that. I love that is what you're offering too, because I think that what you've done in this interview, which I just think is so brilliant, is just removed the judgment and removed the labeling it wrong, from any kind of mismatch in libido, and saying like, well, that doesn't mean that there's something wrong. It just means that you might need more clarity about what you want that's different, rather than going along with what you think the other person wants. You might feel shame about it and not know how to admit it or allow it or ask for it, or you might assume that what's happening is what the other person wants when they assume it's what you want, and you have all those assumptions to break through. And so it's like, here's how to really reconnect with yourself and assess what it is that you need. And then, like, I love that this resource is something that couples can do together if they are, because then that removes all of the pressure, like, well, I'm wanting to do this work, what if my partner doesn't? It's like, well, it's a really simple test that you can take together, a quiz that you can take together, so that you're not like, well, I'm going to try to figure out what you need, which,
Right.
Especially if a woman's doing that with a man, she feels like she doesn't want to put pressure on him or pathologize him or tell him what to do. So it's like, this is so, removing all of that and just saying like, hey, here's this fun quiz we can take together. And I want to learn, like, how we can have even more pleasure. And it's like, why not? And then you don't have to make anything wrong.
Exactly. Because nobody's broken. We just have different pathways to arousal. We're not all the same door doesn't work for everybody. So it's just about kind of finding what your gateway in to your own arousal is. And so that sexual speedometer test is really useful for that. It gets you out of that high libido, low libido dichotomy, which I think can be really toxic. I think we have to get out of that conversation, even though like I use those words because that's what people relate to. It's really just a matter of finding your gateway in. And in that, the test, it's are my brakes really high? Is my accelerator slow? Or do I have a really high accelerator and really low brakes, And so like I'm kind of on all the time and I'm up for it at any time and anywhere. And you're with a partner who maybe has more sensitive system where things can kind of shut their turn on off really quickly. And so you just have to learn how to work with that and how to navigate that in a way where it's not pathologizing anybody. There's nothing wrong with anybody. We're just wired differently. So if we can learn what that is for ourselves and for our partner, then we can start to work towards harmonizing and getting on the same page.
Yeah. I couldn't have said it better myself. It's really just, and I love the terms that you're using because they are playful and, like the brakes and the accelerator and, it's like, it's not like, because I feel like even if we try to bring clinical terms in, that really makes it not as fun too. Like,
yeah,
well,
it's too cut and dry.
right. So it's like, let's be playful about it. And let's look at like, oh, what can I do to like, rev up your engine a little bit more,
Exactly.
It could be physical, it could be emotional, it could be logistical, and kind of like removing the shame about talking about it. And,
Yep.
So I do love that. And I feel really inspired and moved. I actually want to get more into your work after this because I feel like what you shared is just so practical and, applicable to anyone. And I'm assuming also across genders, like we've talked a lot about heterosexual couples, but I imagine that what you're talking about applies to all genders, because it really,
absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
like not making assumptions, it's removing assumptions. Right. And I think that's, what even assumptions about gender and what genders should be like, and just really getting clarity on how we're wired as individuals and then bringing
right. It's neutral, really. I know when you come down to really the core principles of desire, it doesn't have really anything to do with your gender. It's, are we relaxed? Are we present? Am I noticing? Am I naming? And do I have the skills to create the clarity to negotiate the fulfillment of that desire? Like it's not about gender, even though a lot of times that high libido, low libido conversation gets very gendered. It doesn't need to be, it can happen to all of us and it does happen to all of us regardless. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so I love that you shared two resources. I'll say them again, the pleasurekeys.com and the sexual speedometer test.com is the two that you mentioned. And I will put those links below the video if you're watching this on YouTube, and then in the show notes if you're listening to it on a podcast platform. So I just really love I'm assuming that people can get in touch with you through those websites. And, do you want to talk a little bit about how you work with people, if people want to get in touch with you?
Yeah. So yeah, if you do get one of those resources, you'll be landing on my website, which is there's a different domain for that. I don't want to overwhelm people with too many domains, pathwaytopleasure.com, but either of those resources will get you on, and that also adds you onto my email list as well, which I do send out stuff about how to work with me periodically or different programs that I'm offering. But I work in one-on-one as well as online programs and in-person couples retreats, as well as private retreats. So I have a lot of different ways that I work with my clients, and I work with people worldwide. So
that's wonderful. Yeah. And especially I think that, it must be just fascinating to work with people worldwide and see the cultural differences. But when we really get down to it, everybody is, we're all humans and we can't make assumptions. And I love that this work is really universal. Any last, inspiration that you want to leave people with?
No, I don't think so. I just appreciate you so much for having me on your show. This has been so lovely. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And likewise, I feel really inspired from this talk, just to even go even deeper and see what I haven't discovered about my own pleasure and my own embodiment, because, everybody is an infinite, being, that we have more parts of ourselves and each other to discover. And, so I wish everybody who's watching or listening to have a day that is filled with that invitation to say yes to all parts of yourself. And how can you just increase your, clarity about what really helps you to feel pleasure and open-heartedness, like Susan was so good at describing. And, I wish everyone that for the rest of their day. And till next time.
Woo. Bye, everybody.